When Michael found meat on his doorstep the first morning, he thought someone was playing a sick joke. A dead rabbit, throat torn clean, still warm in the Montana frost. He was dying, alone in a cabin 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, too weak to hunt, too proud to ask for help. And now this. His hands shook as he lifted the rabbit. Not from weakness this time, from the tracks in the snow. Wolf tracks, single animal, large. The prints led from the forest edge straight to his door, then back again. Deliberate, purposeful, like someone delivering groceries. Michael's legs gave out. He sat hard on the porch steps, rabbit in his lap, staring at those tracks. His heart hammered against ribs that showed too clearly through his shirt these days. 3 months since the pneumonia took hold, 2 months since he'd eaten anything but canned soup and stale crackers. The town doctor said he needed rest, medicine, proper food. Michael had told him to go to hell. He'd lived alone for 30 years, ever since Margaret died, never asked anyone for anything, wasn't about to start now, even if his lungs felt like broken glass with every breath. But the wolf tracks made his vision swim. 3 years ago he'd found a wolf pup in his barn, gunshot wound in the shoulder, infection setting in. The ranchers in the valley had started a culling program, shoot on sight, ask questions never. This pup had dragged itself nearly a mile before collapsing in Michael's hay. His neighbors called him insane. "It'll kill your chickens," they said. "It'll come back with the pack and tear you apart." Michael didn't care. He'd looked into that pup's amber eyes and seen Margaret somehow. The way she'd looked at him those last days in the hospital, fighting so hard to live, needing help she wouldn't ask for. He'd cleaned the wound, fed the pup by hand, watched it grow stronger over 6 weeks while he grew weaker inside, wondering what kind of man saves the thing that might kill him. The day he released it, the wolf had looked back once from the tree line. Just once. Then vanished. Michael had never seen it again. Until now. Sitting on his porch, too sick to stand, holding a dead rabbit, staring at wolf tracks in the snow. He dragged himself inside, cooked the meat with hands that barely worked, ate the first real protein he'd had in weeks, fell asleep in his chair, too exhausted to make it to bed, too stunned to process what had happened. The next morning there was a grouse. Third morning, 2 fish from the creek, frozen solid but fresh. Someone had placed them carefully on the porch railing, arranged like an offering. Michael stopped trying to understand. On the 4th morning, he was strong enough to stand at the window before dawn, watching, waiting. The sky was that particular shade of grey that comes before snowfall, the silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Then he saw it. The wolf emerged from the trees at first light. Massive now, easily 120 pounds, dark grey coat, almost black, and on its right shoulder, visible even at this distance, a scar. Bare skin where fur would never grow again. Michael's breath fogged the window glass. The wolf carried a snowshoe hare in its jaws. It walked straight to the porch with none of the caution wild animals should show near human dwellings. Set the hare down gently, precise. Then it sat and looked directly at Michael's window. Their eyes met across 30 feet of frozen morning. The wolf didn't move, didn't look away, just sat there in the snow with its breath misting the air, watching the man who'd saved its life 3 years ago. Michael pressed his hand against the glass. The wolf's ears pricked forward. For maybe 10 seconds, they stayed like that, man and wolf, separated by window glass and species and everything that should have made this moment impossible. Then the wolf stood, turned, walked back into the forest with its tail held level, unhurried, certain. Michael slid down the wall to the floor. He sat there in his underwear and his dead wife's bathrobe, shaking not from fever, but from something his rational mind refused to name. The wolf was feeding him. The wolf remembered. The wolf knew he was dying, and it was keeping him alive. He put his face in his hands and cried for the first time since Margaret's funeral. It became routine. Every morning before sunrise, the wolf brought food, rabbit, grouse. Once, impossibly, a young deer, dragged nearly half a mile through snow, left steaming at the door. Michael cooked what he could, froze the rest in snowbanks, felt his strength returning one meal at a time. He stopped asking why, stopped trying to explain it to himself in rational terms. Some things existed beyond explanation. The wolf never came close, never entered the porch, just delivered its offering and retreated, sometimes sitting in the tree line for a few minutes watching, like it needed to see Michael take the food inside, needed confirmation the human was eating. By the third week, Michael could walk without gasping. By the fourth, he could split firewood for 20 minutes before needing to rest. His lungs still burned, but the burning felt like healing now, not dying. He started leaving things on the porch in return. Not food, that felt wrong, insulting somehow, but a wool blanket, a plastic tarp, things a wild animal might use for a den. They were never taken. The wolf wanted nothing from him except to watch him live. One morning, the food didn't come. Michael waited at the window until noon, worry gnawing his gut. Had the wolf been shot? Trapped? The valley ranchers were still killing on sight. He'd heard gunfire 2 days ago, distant but clear. At dusk he heard scratching at the door. Not the usual confident placement of prey. This was frantic, desperate, claws on wood. Michael grabbed his rifle, old instinct, and set it down, opened the door with just his hands. The wolf stood 3 feet away, closer than it had ever come. Its right front paw was caught in a snare, wire cut deep into the leg above the old scar, blood matted in the fur. The wolf was panting, eyes wild with pain and something else. Trust. It had come to him for help. Michael's hands shook as he knelt in the snow. The wolf didn't move, didn't growl, just watched him with those amber eyes, breathing hard, trembling. "Okay," Michael whispered. "Okay, I've got you." He worked the snare with wire cutters from his toolkit, movements slow and careful. The wolf whined once when the wire pulled tight before releasing, but it didn't snap, didn't try to run, just stood there and let the human who'd saved it once save it again. When the snare finally came free, Michael fell back in the snow, chest heaving. The wolf lifted its injured paw, licked the wound once, then looked at Michael. For 10 seconds they stayed frozen, man and wolf, 3 feet apart in the failing light. Then the wolf leaned forward, stretched its neck out, and touched its nose to Michael's hand. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, cold nose against warm palm, a deliberate touch, gentle as a whisper. Then the wolf turned and limped into the forest. Michael sat in the snow until dark, staring at his hand, feeling where the wolf's nose had pressed against his skin. His whole body shook. Not from cold, not from sickness, from the weight of being chosen, being trusted, being loved in a language that had no words. He went inside and called his neighbor, the one who'd never judged him for saving a wolf pup 3 years ago, asked if he'd come check on Michael once a week, make sure he was eating, taking his medicine. Asked for help for the first time in 30 years because the wolf had taught him something, had shown him through action what pride had hidden from view, that accepting care isn't weakness, that needing someone doesn't make you less, that survival is a gift you accept with both hands open. The wolf didn't return for 5 days. Michael healed enough to walk the property line, checking his own traps and snares. He'd set them for rabbits years ago, mostly forgotten about them. He pulled every single one, dismantled them, threw the wire into his truck bed with hands that felt cleaner for the first time in decades. If the wolf had stepped in his trap, he'd have never forgiven himself. On the sixth morning, fresh snow had fallen overnight. 3 inches of pristine white covered the world. Michael stood at his window with coffee, watching dawn break pink and gold over the mountains. Movement at the tree line. Not one wolf. 3. His wolf, he thought of it that way now, possessive and wondering, stood in front. But flanking it were 2 others. Smaller, leaner, younger. They moved with the cautious energy of animals not yet fully grown, ears swiveling at every sound. The injured wolf's pups had to be. Michael's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. The 3 wolves sat in a line 30 yards from the cabin. His wolf in the center, the 2 youngsters on either side. Steam rose from their breath in the frozen air. Nobody moved. Then his wolf stood, took 3 steps forward, stopped, looked back at the pups. One of them, braver or more foolish, crept forward, belly low to the snow, ears flat, every line of its body screaming submission and fear. But it came, followed its parent toward the human dwelling where it should never, ever go. The second pup followed. Michael set his coffee down with shaking hands. He didn't have words for what this was. The wolf was introducing him to its children, teaching them that this place, was safe. The 3 wolves sat 15 yards from the porch now, close enough that Michael could see the old scar on the adult's shoulder, the healing wound on its leg, could see the pups' amber eyes, one lighter, one darker, both fixed on him with a mixture of terror and curiosity that made his chest ache. He wanted to go outside, wanted to show them he understood the magnitude of this moment. But instinct, or maybe something deeper, told him to stay still, to simply witness. The adult wolf made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine. The pups' ears pricked forward. They watched their parent closely, reading signals Michael couldn't begin to interpret. Then the wolf did something that stopped Michael's heart. It lay down. Right there in the snow, 15 yards from a human's home, the wolf stretched out its legs and rested its head on its paws. Vulnerable, exposed, the ultimate display of trust. The pups looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then, slowly, they lay down too. 3 wolves resting in Michael's yard like dogs on a summer lawn. Michael stood at the window for 20 minutes, barely breathing. The wolves dozed. One pup scratched behind its ear with a hind leg. The adult yawned, showing all its teeth, then resettled its head. Casual, comfortable, safe. When they finally rose and melted back into the forest, Michael had to sit down. His legs wouldn't hold him. His mind couldn't process what his eyes had seen. The wolf wasn't just feeding him anymore. It was weaving him into its life, into its family, showing its pups, this human is pack. Michael pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and understood something that made him want to weep. He'd been so lonely for so long. Ever since Margaret died, he'd built walls around himself, told himself he needed nothing and nobody. Let his neighbors think him strange, let his family drift away. Chose isolation like it was a virtue, and a wolf, a wild animal that owed him nothing, had decided he deserved better, had refused to let him die alone. The visits continued through February. Sometimes just the adult wolf, sometimes all 3. Once, incredibly, Michael woke to find 5 wolves in his clearing, his wolf, the 2 pups, and 2 others he didn't recognize. Younger adults, lean and watchful. The whole pack, or at least part of it. They sat in a semicircle facing the cabin, breath steaming in the pre-dawn cold, like they were holding court, like his porch was pack territory now. Michael stood at the window with tears running down his face and didn't bother wiping them away. His neighbor Tom started coming by once a week, like promised, brought supplies, checked Michael's vitals with the blood pressure cuff he'd bought specifically for this purpose. Never asked why Michael had finally accepted help, just showed up, steady and reliable. The second time Tom visited, he saw the wolves. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, standing at the kitchen window. The adult and both pups were lying in the snow 20 yards out, soaking up weak winter sun. "Michael, that's not normal." "I know," Michael said quietly. "That big one, that's the pup you saved, isn't it?" Tom's voice was hushed, reverent. "Yeah." Tom was quiet for a long time. Then, "What did you do to deserve this?" Michael shook his head. He'd asked himself the same question 100 times. I didn't let it die, that's all. I didn't let it die when it would have been easier to." "And it remembers," Tom said, wonder thick in his voice. "It remembers." But it was more than memory, Michael thought. Memory was recalling a face, a scent, a moment. This was something deeper. This was understanding, reciprocity. A wolf grasping that a human had chosen its life over convenience, over safety, over the judgment of others, and choosing to return that gift in kind. One morning in early March, Michael woke to silence. No scratching at the door, no soft thuds of meat being deposited on wood. He knew before he got to the window the wolves were gone, not dead. He would have felt that somehow, a rupture in the fabric of the world. Just gone, moved on. Spring was coming. The pack had territory to reclaim, dens to prepare, life to get on with. Michael stood at the window for an hour, staring at empty snow, and felt the loss like a physical thing in his chest. But underneath the grief was something else. Something warm and solid. Gratitude. He'd been dying 3 months ago. Dying of pneumonia, yes, but also of loneliness, of the poison that comes from cutting yourself off from every living thing, and a wolf, a wild animal that owed him nothing, had refused to let him go that way, had fed him, trusted him, showed him its children, taught him that connection doesn't ask permission, it simply is if you're brave enough to accept it. Michael got dressed, made coffee, called Tom and asked if he wanted to come over for dinner that weekend. Called his sister, in Bozeman, hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, and listened to her cry with relief when she heard his voice. Started living again. The meat in his freezer lasted another month. He cooked it slowly, carefully, making it stretch. Each meal felt sacred somehow. Communion. He was eating survival itself. When spring finally broke for real, Michael walked his property line and found wolf tracks everywhere. Old ones, weathered by melt and refreeze, they circled his cabin in overlapping paths. The pack had been watching over him all winter, even when he couldn't see them. Protecting him. He knelt in the mud and pressed his hand into a print. The impression was enormous, nearly 5 inches across. A mature male in its prime, his wolf, all grown up. Michael threw himself into recovery with the same intensity he'd once thrown into isolation. He gained back the weight he'd lost, started hiking again, short distances at first, then longer, as his lungs remembered how to work properly. Tom joined him sometimes, and they'd walk in comfortable silence through forests that felt different now, sacred almost. Spring turned to summer, the world exploded green. Michael planted a garden for the first time since Margaret died. Tomatoes, beans, herbs. His hands in the soil felt like prayer, like apology and gratitude mixed together. He saw wolf sign regularly, scat on the trails, tracks near the creek. Once, a deer carcass stripped clean, left at the edge of his property like an offering or a message. The pack was close. watching, but he never saw them. July came hot and dry. Forest fire warnings went up across the valley. Michael checked his fire breaks obsessively, cleared brush, kept water barrels full. The other ranchers did the same, faces tight with worry. The fire started 10 miles north on a Tuesday afternoon. Lightning strike in dead timber. By evening, the sky was orange. By midnight, the evacuation order came. Michael loaded his truck with documents, photos of Margaret, his grandfather's rifle. Stood in his living room trying to decide what else mattered. The garden outside would burn, the cabin might burn. 30 years of life here, reduced to what fit in a truck bed. He was locking the front door when he heard the howling. Multiple wolves, close. The sound raised every hair on his arms. Michael turned. In the firelight glow that made the whole world look like hell, he saw them. The pack was gathered at the tree line. All of them. He counted 7 animals. His wolf in front, massive and dark. The 2 pups, nearly grown now, 4 others. They were howling at him, warning him. The fire was coming faster than the authorities knew. The wolves could smell it, feel it, sense it in ways human technology couldn't match. And they'd come to tell him, run, now, get out. Michael's hands shook as he climbed into his truck. He started the engine, began backing down the driveway. The wolves watched him go, still howling, their voices carrying over the roar of approaching flame. He made it to the main road, joined the caravan of evacuating residents, looked in his rearview mirror and saw fire crest the ridge behind his property. If he'd waited another 20 minutes, he'd have been trapped. The wolves had known, and they'd come back. Through fire and smoke and chaos, they'd come back to warn the human who'd once saved one of their own. Michael pulled over at the evacuation center, stumbled out of his truck, and vomited in the parking lot from the sheer, overwhelming weight of what had just happened. Tom found him there, gripped his shoulder, helped him inside. "Did you see them?" Michael gasped. "Did you see the wolves?" Tom's face was grim. "I saw them. Everyone saw them. They were running the ridge line, herding the deer and elk ahead of the fire, pushing the animals toward the evacuation routes, away from the flames. They were helping," Michael whispered. "They were helping," Tom confirmed. The fire burned for 3 days, consumed 12,000 acres, destroyed 7 homes. Michael's cabin survived. The fire breaks held, and the wind shifted at the last moment. But he'd have died in it if the wolves hadn't warned him. When authorities finally let residents return, Michael drove back slowly, hardly believing anything would still be standing. But there was his cabin, smoke-damaged but intact. His garden burned to nothing, the forest around him blackened and skeletal. And on his porch, centered precisely in front of the door, was a deer haunch, fresh, still warm. The wolves had survived the fire, and they'd come back to feed him again. Michael sank onto the porch steps with the deer haunch beside him and sobbed. Not from grief this time, from something he couldn't name, something too big for language. The wolves had saved his life twice now, once from sickness, once from fire, had fed him through winter and warned him through disaster, had loved him in their way with a fierceness and loyalty that put most human relationships to shame. He was still sitting there when Tom's truck pulled up an hour later. "You okay?" Tom called, getting out. Michael gestured at the meat, couldn't speak. Tom stared at it, then at Michael. His eyes went bright with understanding. "Jesus," he breathed. "They're still looking after you." "I don't deserve this," Michael managed. "Maybe not," Tom said gently. "But maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about one living thing recognizing another and choosing to care." That night, Michael lay in his bed in his smoke-stained cabin and stared at the ceiling. Outside, somewhere in the burned forest, a wolf howled, a single voice rising and falling in the darkness. His wolf. Letting him know, "I'm here, you're not alone." Michael closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him like a benediction. The weeks that followed were strange. The burned forest had a post-apocalyptic quality, blackened trunks reaching into grey sky, ash covering everything. But life persisted. Deer came to browse on the first green shoots, pushing through scorched earth. Birds returned, and the wolves remained. Michael saw them more often now. The fire had stripped away their cover, made them visible. They moved through the burned landscape like ghosts, dark against ash-white ground. His wolf brought food twice more over the next month, a grouse, a rabbit. Then the offerings stopped. Michael understood. The pack had to survive too, had to hunt for themselves, rebuild in a changed landscape. He didn't need the meat anymore anyway. His strength had fully returned, and Tom helped him replant the garden. But he missed the connection, missed knowing the wolves were watching over him. September came. The burned forest began its slow transformation. Wildflowers erupted in profusion where trees had stood, carpets of purple fireweed and yellow arnica. The world was rebuilding itself. Michael was sitting on his porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, when he saw movement. The wolf emerged from the tree line, not alone this time. Behind it came the two yearlings, nearly adult-sized now, and behind them 3 tiny shapes, stumbling on oversized paws, tripping over their own feet. Pups, new life, the next generation. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The adult wolf led its family to the clearing in front of the cabin, 15 yards away, close enough for Michael to see the grey in the wolf's muzzle, age settling in, close enough to see the pup's bright, curious eyes as they tumbled over each other, playing. The wolf sat, the yearlings sat, the pups kept wrestling, oblivious to the solemnity of the moment. Michael understood what he was seeing. The wolf was showing him the future, showing him, your kindness didn't end with me. It echoes forward. These pups exist because you chose mercy 3 years ago. This is what you saved. Michael stood slowly, walked to the edge of the porch. The adult wolf's eyes tracked him but showed no fear. Just recognition, just love, maybe, whatever the wolf equivalent was. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. His voice broke on the words. "Thank you for saving me." The wolf held his gaze for a long moment. Then it stood, gathered its pups with a low bark, and led the family back into the forest. Michael watched them disappear into the burned landscape that was already turning green again. He sat back down on the porch steps and let the tears come. Good tears this time. Healing tears. That winter, Michael started volunteering at the local wildlife center, teaching kids about wolves, about coexistence, about how wild things aren't monsters, but families trying to survive. He showed them photos of tracks in the snow, explained pack dynamics, watched their eyes go wide with wonder. "Are wolves dangerous?" a girl asked once, maybe 8 years old, all freckles and curiosity. Michael thought about how to answer. About the wolf that had fed him, warned him, trusted him with its children. "They can be," he said honestly. "They're wild. They're predators. But so are we, and like us, they take care of their families. They remember kindness. They understand loyalty." "Have you ever seen a real wolf?" another kid asked. Michael smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "I have." He didn't tell them the whole story. How could he? They'd think he was making it up, spinning fairy tales. Some things were too sacred to share with people who hadn't earned them. But Tom knew. and Tom's wife, Sarah, after Tom finally told her one night over dinner. And gradually, quietly, a few others, people who'd seen the wolves during the fire, who'd witnessed something they couldn't explain. Word spread in whispers. The rancher who'd saved a wolf pup? The wolf that came back. Some people thought it was beautiful. Others thought Michael was a fool, anthropomorphizing wild animals, seeing meaning where there was only instinct. Michael didn't argue with them, didn't try to convince anyone. He knew what he knew. Had the scars on his soul to prove it, healed scars now, but scars nonetheless. Spring came again, 3 years since he'd released that injured pup into the forest. Michael was 62 now, healthier than he'd been in a decade. His cabin was repaired, his garden flourished. He had dinner with Tom and Sarah twice a month, coffee with his sister, every Sunday morning via video call. He was living again. Really living, not just existing, and he owed it to a wolf. One evening in late April, Michael was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset when he felt it, that prickle of awareness that meant he was being watched. He didn't turn around, just waited, heart rate steady, calm, footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming up behind him, not human footsteps. The wolf walked around the corner of the cabin and sat down next to the porch steps. 3 feet away. Closer than it had ever come when Michael was outside. Michael stayed very still. The wolf looked older, more grey in its muzzle, a slight stiffness in how it settled onto its haunches, but its eyes were the same. Amber. Intelligent. Knowing. They sat together in silence as the sun painted the mountains gold and purple. Michael on his porch, the wolf on the ground beside him, like an old dog and its master, except this was no dog and Michael was no master. They were something else, something without a name. After maybe 10 minutes, the wolf stood, stretched, looked at Michael one last time, a look that held weight, held meaning, held goodbye. Then it walked away. Not hurrying, not looking back, just disappearing into the forest that was rebuilding itself tree by tree, year by year. Michael understood. The wolf was old now, slowing down. This might be the last time. "Thank you," Michael called after it. His voice carried across the clearing, into the trees. "For everything. Thank you." A single howl answered him from deep in the forest. Long and mournful and beautiful. "You're welcome," it seemed to say. "Live well. Remember me." Michael sat on his porch until full dark, listening to the night sounds, feeling the ache in his chest that was grief and gratitude tangled together. He would remember, how could he not? The wolf had saved his life in every way that mattered. Michael was 64. His life had become something he'd never expected, full. He had friends. He had purpose. He taught at the Wildlife Center 3 days a week, helped Tom with his cattle sometimes, video called his sister every Sunday without fail. He was happy in a quiet, solid way that didn't need explaining. But he thought about the wolf every day, wondered if it was still alive. Wild wolves rarely lived past 8 or 9 years, and his wolf would be 8 now, maybe 9. Old for a wild animal, ancient almost. Late October brought the first serious snow. Michael woke one morning to find 6 inches blanketing the world, muffling sound, making everything feel suspended. He made coffee, stood at his window watching chickadees at the feeder. Movement at the tree line made his heart stutter. A wolf, but not his wolf. This one was younger, maybe 3 or 4 years old. One of the pups he'd seen years ago grown now into a powerful adult. It stood at the edge of the clearing, not approaching, just waiting. Michael set his coffee down, pulled on his boots and coat, stepped onto the porch. The young wolf didn't run. It turned and looked back into the forest, then looked at Michael again. "Come," the gesture said. "Follow me." Michael's chest tightened. He knew, somehow he knew. He followed the wolf into the forest. The animal stayed visible, moving slow enough for the human to keep up through deep snow. It led him 1/2 mile from the cabin into a part of the forest Michael rarely visited. Dense spruce, dark and quiet. The young wolf stopped, looked back one more time, then melted into the trees. Michael pushed through the last of the spruce branches and stopped. A small clearing, sunlight breaking through clouds, lighting the space like a cathedral. And there, lying in the snow, was his wolf. Michael knew it was dead before he got close. The stillness was absolute, but he stumbled forward anyway, fell to his knees beside the body. The wolf looked peaceful, eyes closed, body stretched out like it had simply lain down to rest. Snow had gathered on its dark fur, turning it grey-white. Natural. No blood, no violence, just old age finally catching up. Michael reached out with shaking hands and touched the wolf's head. The fur was cold, stiff. This had happened hours ago, maybe last night. But the pack had brought him here, had shown him, let him say goodbye. "Oh," Michael said, and the sound that came out was halfway between a word and a sob. "Oh, no, 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 no!" He bent over the wolf's body and wept. Ugly, wrenching sobs that tore out of his chest like something physical. He pressed his forehead to the wolf's cold shoulder and cried for everything, for the wolf's life, for the impossible gift it had given him, for his own life that this animal had saved in every way that mattered, for the loss of something so rare that most people never experienced it. He didn't know how long he knelt there, long enough that his knees went numb, long enough that snow began to fall again, dusting them both. When he finally lifted his head, he saw them, the pack, all of them, sitting in a loose circle around the clearing. 7 wolves, maybe 8, young and old, watching him grieve their fallen member. They'd come for a funeral. Michael's breath caught. He looked at each wolf in turn, saw the yearlings he'd watched grow up, saw new faces, saw the continuation of something that had started 5 years ago with an injured pup in a barn. "Thank you," he whispered to the dead wolf beneath his hands. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for teaching me how to live again." The pack sat in silence, witnesses, family. After a long moment, the largest wolf, the alpha now, Michael supposed, stood. It approached slowly, carefully, reading Michael for threat. When Michael didn't move, the wolf came close enough to touch. It lowered its head, sniffed the dead wolf, then gently touched its nose to Michael's hand. The same gesture his wolf had made 5 years ago when Michael freed it from the snare. Recognition, acceptance, kinship. "You were pack," the gesture said. "You are still pack." Then the alpha stepped back. The pack rose as one and disappeared into the forest, leaving Michael alone with the body of the wolf that had saved his life. Michael sat there until the sun began to set, one hand resting on cold fur, saying goodbye in the only way he knew how. By being present, by witnessing, by loving something wild enough to let it go. Michael buried the wolf in that clearing. It took him 2 days. The ground was frozen, the digging brutal on his aging body, but he did it alone, refusing Tom's offer of help. This was something he needed to do himself. He lined the grave with spruce boughs, lowered the wolf's body gently, reverently, stood there for a long time with his hands on the shovel, trying to find words that felt adequate. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," he finally said. His voice cracked. "I was dying when you found me, not just sick, dying inside, and you showed me how to live again." The forest was silent around him, listening. "I hope you knew how much it meant. I hope you understood. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I hope wherever you are now you're running, free, wild, the way you were always meant to be." He filled the grave, marked it with a cairn of stones, left one of Margaret's old scarves tied to a nearby branch, something bright and human in the wild space. A memorial, a thank you, a goodbye. When he finally walked back to his cabin, the sun was setting. The forest glowed gold and shadow, and from somewhere deep in the trees he heard them. The pack, howling, not mournful this time, not sad. This was something else, a celebration maybe, or an acknowledgement. We're still here, life continues, your wolf lives on in us. Michael stood in his clearing and listened until the howling faded. Then he went inside, made dinner, called his sister, lived. The years that followed were good ones. Michael turned 65, then 66. He kept volunteering at the wildlife centre, kept having dinner with Tom and Sarah, kept tending his garden. He dated for a while, a woman named Eleanor, who ran the local library, but it didn't work out. That was okay. He wasn't lonely anymore. He saw the pack occasionally, from a distance, always. They'd moved their territory slightly, but they still passed through his land. Sometimes he'd find tracks in fresh snow. Once, a deer carcass at the edge of his property. Gifts, reminders. We remember you. The young wolves that had been pups when his wolf died were adults now. With pups of their own, the pack continued. Generation after generation, carrying forward something that started with one injured pup and one stubborn man who refused to look away from suffering. Michael told the story sometimes now to the kids at the wildlife centre, to journalists who'd heard whispers and came asking questions, to anyone who would listen. Some people believed him, others thought he was romanticizing, projecting human emotions onto wild animals. Michael didn't argue anymore. He knew what he knew. The wolf had loved him, had saved him, had changed everything, and that was enough. On a cold morning in late November, when Michael was 68 years old, and still healthy, still working, still living, he stood at his window with coffee and watched the sun rise over mountains dusted with new snow. Movement at the tree line caught his eye. 3 wolves, young adults, moving with the easy confidence of animals in their prime. They sat at the edge of his clearing, same spot their ancestor had sat 8 years ago, and they just looked at him. Michael's throat tightened. He raised one hand, pressed it against the window glass. The wolves watched for maybe 30 seconds. Then they stood and disappeared into the forest. Michael stood there for a long time after they'd gone, his hand still on the glass, feeling the cold seep through. They remembered. The pack still remembered. And they were telling him, we're still here, still watching, still family. Michael lowered his hand, picked up his coffee, smiled through the tears on his face. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty forest, to the wolves he couldn't see anymore, to the memory of one injured pup that had changed his entire world. "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't ask permission. That family isn't always blood. That mercy is never wasted." Outside, as if in answer, a single howl rose from somewhere deep in the trees. Michael closed his eyes and listened. And for the rest of his life, which would be long and full and happy, he would remember this moment. Would remember that once, when he was dying and alone, a wild thing chose to save him. And in saving him, taught him how to be human again. If you've ever experienced an impossible moment with an animal, a moment where you felt seen, understood, chosen, right? Animals remember kindness. If this story touched something deep in your heart, if you believe in the bond between humans and wild things, share this with someone who needs to remember that we're not alone in this world. I've recorded hundreds of stories about animals over the years, stories of loyalty, of courage, of inexplicable connections between species. But Michael's story, this story of the wolf that refused to let a man die alone, stays with me in ways I can't fully explain. Maybe because it asks us to believe in something science can't fully measure, in gratitude, in memory that spans years, in love that crosses the divide between human and wild. Michael is 71 now, still healthy, still living in his cabin in Montana. And the wolves, the descendants of that injured pup he saved so many years ago, still pass through his land, still watching over the man who chose mercy when killing would have been easier, who proved that